and diagnosis of risk factors and assessment of the coronary patients, chronic coronary syndrome patients, CCS patients. And the main topic will be the contemporary management of the patient with the coronary syndromes. And lastly, special topics with a few slides on angina management with metabolic agents for this evening. So now something about ischemic heart disease. Ischemic heart disease, definitely we know that is a chronic and systemic disease with a wide range of associated symptoms and clinical outcomes. So this is not a very single disease which can be explained or defined by a single term. And angina represents its most common symptom, though there may be some other symptoms, but angina is most symptom. Almost it is typified, ischemic heart disease is typified by angina. And this disease, particularly the ischemic heart disease, can have a very stable periods. We call it a stable ischemic heart disease, but can also be unstable at any time because of some of the acute atherothrombotic event like plaque rupture or erosion. However, the disease is chronic, most often progressive, and hence serious. These three terms we must remember that this is a chronic disease and it is a progressive disease, and at times it may be serious. Though many a times this is clinically apparently remain silent. So ischemic heart disease is really a health problem in the middle age and older age group of the people throughout the world. It is not only confined to the developed or industrialized countries, but also it has been increased in incidence in developing and poor countries also. In the contemporary clinical practice, we often interchangeably use three terms. One is a stable ischemic heart disease, another stable coronary artery disease, and stable angina. To clarify this, stable angina is the symptomatic form of stable ischemic heart disease, whereas stable coronary artery disease is the pathological term that may or may not have be symptomatic. However, ischemic heart is said to be stable when the symptoms, if there is any, are manageable and not rapidly progressive. So term stable is some sort of dubious term, and usually we use in this sort of situation in case of ischemic heart disease. Now, another term is uh, stable ischemic heart disease and acute coronary syndrome. Uh, Acute coronary syndrome terms occur in contrast to the stable ischemic heart disease. And this acute coronary syndrome, as you all know, that this encompasses unstable angina, non-ST elevation ACS, and ST elevation MI. Although ACS is the manifestation of the same general disease process as the stable one, risk stratification, diagnostic testing, and management usually differ significantly between the two conditions. So we must remember, though pathologically they have the similar, they're one and another in the same spectrum, but their management aspect, their stratification aspect are totally, not totally, but many times very different. So the term stable actually was not thought to best for describing different clinical situations because this disease is not at all always stable. Maybe sometimes it's stable, but which is evolving and sometimes regressing. So this stage of disease, the chronic stage of ischemic heart disease, either it is a evolving stage or in many times it will be regressing. And of course, very limited time it may remain as stable. So this terminology first had been was been discussed for a long time of whether this should be remain as a stable term or others. So the first time in the 2019 ESC guidelines, they have changed the nomenclature from the disease to the syndrome. So so the ESC introduces the new term. The term is chronic coronary syndrome instead of stable ischemic heart disease. So this is a new terminology. And look here that the term has been changed from the disease to the syndrome. The nomenclature is more in line with the contemporary understanding of its development, progress, and management, as I have discussed earlier. So now we call this chronic coronary syndromes, and that includes many aspects of clinical features I will discuss in the later. So if we can try to remember in this way that that this type disease, myocardial ischemic syndrome, is a continuum or a spectrum of disease, and due to chronic non-obstructive or obstructive plaque, maybe other reason, this can be termed as myocardial ischemic syndrome, and which may be either acute coronary syndrome or chronic coronary syndromes. So today my topic will be around the subject of chronic coronary syndromes, its diagnosis and management. So now, if you can define, as defined in the guideline, the spectrum of chronic coronary syndrome is broad and includes individuals with chronic stable angina, asymptomatic ischemia, prior myocardial infarction, prior revascularization, as well as in individual with non-obstructive coronary atherosclerosis. So this does not mean that there is only obstructive atherosclerotic disease in the coronary arteries. Chronic coronary syndrome is most frequently caused by, of course, by atheromatous plaque, which is obstruct the disease and give the symptom. However, other contributions such as endothelial dysfunction, microvascular disease, or vasospasm may also exist either in combination or with the coronary atherosclerosis. So this is a quite a long or large spectrum of pathological situation where we can combinedly call them as chronic coronary syndrome. And the same guideline has defined this chronic coronary syndrome in 6 clinical scenarios, and of all the participants and the panelists know these 6 groups. So I'm not going in detail, just enumerating them. The most common one, the patients with suspected coronary disease and stable angina syndrome or dyspnea. The second one is the knee-onset heart failure or LV dysfunction with suspected coronary disease. Asymptomatic or symptomatic patient with stabilized symptoms less than 1 year after ACS, or asymptomatic patient or symptomatic patient with more than 1 year after initial diagnosis or revascularization, patients with angina and suspected vasospastic and microvascular disease, and the last one is asymptomatic patients in whom coronary artery disease detected at screening. This is the important, the sixth group is important because there are a lot of patients in the community, those who do not have any symptom, but for screening for other purpose, say for preoperative or other reason, the coronary artery disease can be detected. So all these patients, either they are symptomatic or asymptomatic, either they're previously revascularized or they previously acute coronary syndrome and stabilized later on, can be grouped in this particular disease continuum, that is chronic coronary syndromes. And for the management aspect, for the easiest way of management aspect, the guideline has grouped them in this particular 6 groups of the disease spectrum. So having some definition in the background, let us go for the pathophysiology of this particular disease area. The exact mechanism of angina varies from patient to patient, no doubt, but the main idea is caused by a mismatch between myocardial oxygen demand and delivery. The simplest diagnosis, the simplest definition for myocardial ischemia and angina. So angina might be the result of different pathologies, ranging from classical obstruction, as I told earlier, maybe due to the alteration in the microcirculation in the coronary system, or there may be some coronary artery spasm. But considering everything, a better understanding of its pathophysiology could provide the basis for tailored approach of therapy in patients with coronary artery disease. So understanding pathophysiology of stable ischemic heart disease or chronic coronary syndrome and angina is a vital aspect to treat and tailor the treatment schedule for each and every patient we treat. So the classical pathophysiological model we learned from our student days is we generally believe that this is caused by atherosclerotic obstructions of the coronary artery disease. And demonstration of such an atherosclerotic obstruction is the key to diagnosis, and removal of such coronary obstruction is the key to treatment. So this is a very simplest understanding that we must have atherosclerotic lesion, and that is the main cause for the of the symptom. And if you can demonstrate that there is some sort of narrowing or stenosis. That is the final diagnosis. And we think that if we treat this obstruction, we treat the disease. Possibly this is oversimplification. But recently, there is a rethinking of the stable ischemic heart disease. So there is a large body of accumulating evidence changes this classical view for views. For example, coronary atherosclerotic obstruction are not consistently present in angina pectoris patient. Number two is coronary stenosis does not have a predictable impact on myocardial perfusion, and stenosis removal is not consistently effective in curing angina or does not have an impact on prognosis in patients with ischemic heart disease. So the classical idea of pathophysiological aspect of ischemic chronic ischemic heart disease or stable ischemic heart disease has been questioned by rethinking this. So nowadays, ischemic heart disease is thought to be a complex pathophysiological process. The idea that it is synonymous with critical stenosis of epicardial coronary artery disease. Possibly it is an oversimplification understanding idea. So it is multifactorial syndrome. The coronary stenosis being the most, just one of the many mechanisms. So you can see on the right hand side of the picture, we can see the myocardial ischemia in the center, but it may be caused by many things. Of course, critical coronary stenosis is one, maybe inflammation, platelet and other coagulation factor, vasospasm, microvascular dysfunction, and endothelial dysfunction. So thereby, a paradigm shift has occurred from the plaque-centric approach to an ischemia-centric approach in the pathophysiological mechanism of stable heart disease, and thereby the treatment and management aspect of this particular disease. So this is what has been rethought, pathophysiological rethinking of the stable coronary artery disease or ischemic heart disease. Now, if we look in this few RCTs, randomized clinical trials, and some registries, we see over here there's a lot of RCTs. They have seen this patient of ischemic heart disease, and look on the right column, right column, patients without significant stenosis. So there are a lot of patients was included in the registries and RCTs. And look on the right side, the patient without significant stenosis but having anginal pain and was treated by these trials. You see, there are from 27 to 90% of the patient in many studies, they were symptomatic and was treated, but without any significant stenosis. The largest registry, the PATEL-MR registry, they have got more than 4 lakh, approximately 4 lakh patient. Here again, 62% patient was without any significant stenosis. This might be one of the important criteria of why the plaque-centric or stenosis-centric idea has been changed to the ischemia-centric. Of course, the plaque-centric or stenosis-centric is a majority of many of the patients will find in our own practice. Now, if we can consider and summarize this finding in a simple word, we can tell like this: all coronary artery disease is not ischemic heart disease. And at the same time, all ischemic heart disease is not coronary artery disease. So we must find which one is coronary artery disease and which is coronary disease without ischemic heart disease, and which ischemic heart disease which is not without any symptom. So this is very important aspect to understand for pathophysiological mechanism and management aspect of particular disease. So after this pathophysiological aspect and clinical aspect, let us have some very simply as this patient's evaluation, diagnosis, and risk assessment before we start our treatment. The main idea of coronary artery disease idea is to establish the symptom severity, because severity of the symptoms sometimes can give rise to the severity of the disease, confirming the presence or extent of the coronary artery disease, and identifying the high-risk features which may warrant revascularization. Because many high-risk patients, most of the patients may need revascularization either in the form of PCI or in the form of CABG. So this aspect of patients should be evaluated during, and before, during, and after the diagnosis is made. So the present guideline, 2009 ESCCCS guideline, has given a wonderful approach for evaluation of the patients with chronic coronary syndrome. The first step means that you must have some discuss about or find the clinical presentation in the form of signs and symptoms. And after that, if we find, we must identify whether there is any comorbidities like diabetes and others, or other cause of symptoms, we must define it. And the next will be the basic testing. And after that, this is an important aspect has been added to this particular guideline, is the assessment of pre-test probability and clinical likelihood of coronary artery disease. This is a clinical aspect association. I will discuss a bit later. And next step should be selecting appropriate testing. So when we differentiate patient in the PTP for clinical likelihood of coronary artery disease, we can we can tailor our future test according to the PTP. And last of all, we must also assess the event risk or risk stratification of this patient. So if we go stepwise from step 1 to step 6, possibly we can ideally describe the patient's pathophysiology and mode of therapy in future. In clinical patient presentation, all of we know that the typical symptom of patient with coronary syndrome is angina pectoris, and all of you know the Haberdin's description. I'm not going to detail. So he has described in 1768, which description possibly still holds good and in our present time also. And for that reason, there is some traditional clinical classification of suspected anginal syndrome. And very recently, the NICE guidelines 2019 has given the old thing in a newer fashion, like the NICE defines anginal pains as follows: that constricting discomfort in the front of the chest, neck, shoulder, jaw, and arms. Second is they precipitated by physical exhaustion and eased by GTN within 5 minutes. So with these criteria, if a person has got 3, he's a definite angina. If has 2 out of the 3, he's possibly atypical angina or probable angina. And 1 or none, possibly the patient has got no angina. Maybe there is a non-anginal or non-ischemic pain or non-cardiac pain. And these are the typical symptoms in different way. I'm not going to detail. And in whether this is very, very typical for symptom on the left-hand side, and there are certain atypical symptoms on the right-hand side with the typical Levin sign in the picture. Now, in ischemic heart disease, in fact, in the stable angina or chronic coronary angina, possibly it should be diagnosed by the history. But physical examination sometimes can give clue, especially when there is acute stage of anginal pain. When there is no anginal pain, maybe there will be no symptom other than the comorbid diseases. But if the patient have got acute pain, and if a physician got chance to examine the patient at that particular time, he may add or elicit certain physical signs. For example, if the patient has myocardial ischemia, the primary thing they have got this decreased systolic dysfunction, and which may give rise to dyskinetic apical impulse, which can be palpated as an apical impulse. And the second one is there will be diastolic decrease of diastolic compliance, and for that reason, the myocardium will be stiff and giving rise to the heart sound 4. We can elicit from there. For both the reason, for systolic function decrement and diastolic compliance decrement, we can have pulmonary congestion, and for that reason, we may have rales or crepitations. And the third one is the papillary muscle dysfunction. If the papillary muscle dysfunction occurs, they may have a mitral regurgitation, and we may have got a murmur of that one. And the common thing is increased sympathetic tone on the right-hand side, and this leads to certain symptoms like diaphoresis, increased heart rate, and increased blood pressure. So these are the physical signs we may have in patient with stable ischemic heart disease during the period of acute myocardial ischemia. The next step, we must understand and find out the comorbidities and their quality of life. So, and also we must try to find whether the cause is from other symptom like IgI, pulmonary or musculoskeletal causes of chest pain. So these are the things we must find from history and physical examinations. The basic testing is not much. Basic testing usually in the first line test is 12-lead ECG, possibly ambulatory ECG in some cases, arrestic echocardiography, and in selected cases we may have chest X-ray. And in many cases we do some laboratory tests, and these tests are mainly not for diagnosis but for risk stratification and secondary prevention of the patient with chronic coronary syndrome. So there are not much tests in the basic aspect or in the initial aspect. So now if we see this part in a clinical assessment structure in algorithm format with the patient with angina, in the left-hand side, we can have a history, age, sex, etc. And you can see over here in the blue line here that three part, whether this is characteristic of the angina, and there are various symptoms. On the right side, some physical examination and some of the basic tests. And from this collectively, we can divide the patient in three groups. One is typical angina, another is atypical angina, and it's a non-anginal pain. So primarily history taking, physical examination, some basic testing will give rise to the diagnosis. If we find a typical angina, that possibly should be going to the ischemic heart disease patient. Now, these are the diagnostic evaluation tests. Usually we do some laboratory testing and non-invasive testing like ECG, resting ECG, chest X-ray, CT, MRI, rest test, stress testing, invasive testing like CAG, structural coronary angiography like IVUS OCT, and some functional aspect. Usually they are invasive, maybe FFR, maybe IFR or CFR. Not all tests are useful for all patients. These tests should be done when it is indicated for the appropriate patient for further investigation. Now, the important aspect of assessment is the pretest probability of coronary artery disease in patients suspected with chronic artery disease. If we can have the chest pain criteria in the middle, and we can classify this in the three groups as I've done earlier: non-anginal pain, atypical pain, on the right side the typical pain. And you can see in the age group. So this is a very simple table. So for example, if a person is between age 50 and 59, and is an atypical chest pain, his probability is 65%. But if he has got typical chest pain, his probability is 93%. The green is the poor risk, I mean the low risk group, and the yellow is the intermediate risk group, and the red one is the high risk group patient. So obviously high risk group patient should be treated emergently, and possibly those patients will need in future revascularization. So this pretest probability is very simple, and we can do it by only clinical examination and history taking. So this is important, and all other tests should be followed by this PTP. So after that, we can have some further appropriate testing. So in all patients, the revascularization futile means the revascularization will give nothing to them. Possibly the diagnosis of coronary artery can be made clinically, and only medical therapy is required for these patients. But if the diagnosis of coronary artery disease is uncertain, establishing a diagnosis using non-invasive functional imaging, as I've told earlier, for mitral dysfunction prior to treatment is reasonable. Either functional or anatomic test can be used to establish diagnosis and severity of coronary artery disease when needed, especially in case of high-risk patient of this group. Now, everybody of us, we know the ischemic cascade, and through this ischemic cascade, how we can choose our test. This is a simple figure on the right-hand side, starting from the normal function to the highest function where angina occurs. We can have a perfusion imaging test, echocardiography, contrast echocardiography, ECG, etc., and like that. And these tests are possible and diagnostic when the symptoms are going up from the normal to the visual level. So this ischemic cascade sometimes help us to isolate patients for whom which test is required and which test is informative to them. Now, considering all this, initial non-invasive test can be arranged in this way if we suggest that the ischemic heart disease patient. So in our routine practice setting, we can follow this guideline. First one, whether the patient is eligible or able to adequately exercise or not. If yes, and if ECG is normal, then we can go for exercise stress test. If the ECG is abnormal, means ST depression is there, LV, digoxin, etc. is there, and no LVB, possibly we can have an exercise echocardiography or exercise myocardial perfusion imaging. And if this patient ECG is abnormal, meaning they have got LVB or ventricular paced rhythm, possibly vasodilator myocardial perfusion imaging is important. So if the patient has got LVB or ventricular pacing, either they need exercise myocardial perfusion or vasodilatory type of myocardial perfusion. Now, if the patient cannot exercise and ECG, whether normal or abnormal, if the patient has got LVB or ventricular paced rhythm, they should have dobutamine or vasodilator echocardiography or vasodilator myocardial infarction. Even if they have got LVB, they also may have vasodilator myocardial perfusion imaging, and possibly they need the CT coronary angiography. So this simple algorithm can help us to identify patient and to find out the severity and the next mode of investigation, especially the advanced testing for myocardial ischemia. So this important aspect has been given by this recent guideline. The first non-invasive testing is done when the patient preferably done in the high clinical likelihood of patient, where possibly revascularization may be needed, and if there is local expertise available. But coronary CTA can be done, it is preferably considered in low clinical group, and patient characteristics suggest high image quality. Sometimes older patient, obese patient cannot do that. And if there is local expertise there. Here I want to tell you that lot of centers in our city has started CT angiography. Not all centers has got proper expertise for interpreting of this station. Most of the patient interpreter have got simple radiological background, and many, not all, many does not have any cardiological lab assessment. So please try to understand yourself the interpretation of CT coronary angiography, because CT coronary angiography possibly will be more common in future after this guideline. And the last one is the preferential consideration. This invasive angiography is considered when high clinical likelihood of severity, and possibly there should be maybe a possibility of CABG, and there is severe LV systolic dysfunction due to coronary artery disease. So if we find anywhere in the cycle of the disease, we can start with the drug therapy. If there is ongoing symptom, we can go for invasive coronary angiography. And if we need, we can have functional assessment. And if I've got more than 90% stenosis, you go for revascularization possibly. And those group who are taking in the drug, and if they're not responding to drug or refractory to drug, they can go for revascularization. So this simplest direct follow-up may help us in clinical practice day-to-day of our life. Now, the last one is the risk stratification in individuals with chronic coronary syndrome. And definitely risk stratification important, because the patient who will benefit from revascularization beyond the amelioration of the symptoms can be detected by risk stratification. The patient with a higher risk will be benefited from revascularization. And the stratification is considered in a hierarchical way. First, we have to clinically evaluate it, patient demographic, risk factor, comorbid, etc., ECG finding, and others. And the next will be the assessment of left ventricular function, mostly by echocardiography, and non-invasive functional tests of ischemia like exercise ECG, stress echo, etc. And assessment of coronary anatomy will be at the highest part. Either you can do it in invasive CAG or CT congiography. So risk stratification is important to identify the high-risk patient for their future management. There are certain points I'm not going to detail, which can define the criteria of high risk group. So for example, exercise ECG, the CVT mortality is more than 3% per year. If the Duke treadmill score is higher, SPECT or PET perfusion imaging, area of ischemia, if it is more than 10% of the liver function, then it will be a high risk group. Stress echo, more than 3 of the 16 segment, if it is extended hypokinesia or echinacea, it will be high risk. Then cardiac MR, even here again, more than 2 segments of the heart is less perfused, that can be high risk. CT angiography TVD and functional aspect is more important in some cases, that is FFR more than 0.8, sorry, less than 0.8, and IFR number 0.89. So these are the few criteria that has been described for high risk patient in imaging studies and angiographic studies. So now, after the pathophysiology, clinical assessment, risk stratification, let us go for contemporary management of ischemic chronic coronary syndrome. The basic goal is to improve prognosis by secondary prevention. They reduce their disease progression, myocardial and cardiac death, and improve quality of life and functional status by reducing symptoms by anti-anginal therapy. And in some cases, revascularization is indicated for patients at high risk or who have limiting symptoms despite optimum medical therapy. But important thing we must remember that the basis for the management of patient with stable ischemic heart disease angina is that not all chest pains are angina pectoris. We must remember that, and not all angina pectoris are equal. All angina is not equal, and not all angina patients are equal. So there are certain differences, and the patient must be personalized for their treatment prescription. So now, the classical way of management strategy in chronic coronary syndrome, again in an algorithm format. If we diagnose a patient by various means having chronic coronary syndrome, first of all, we must have lifestyle management by diet, exercise, etc. Then we can have risk factor management, BP control, diabetes control, sleep apnea, medical control, etc. And the next important is today's discussion is about the medical therapy. Medical therapy has got 3 aspects. One is prevention of cardiovascular events, meaning to prevent cardiomyopathy, myocardial infarction or sudden death, heart failure, etc. We usually use aspirin, statin, and sometimes RAS inhibitors in the form of ACE inhibitor or ARB. And another important is the anti-anginal therapy. Here again, as the customary, we divide them in first line therapy like beta blocker, CCB, and others. And if persistent pain, there may be second line of therapy like long-acting nitrates, ivabradine, ranolazine, then timetergine, etc. And if still they are symptomatic, then possibly we must consider for revascularization. But for symptom relief, only for symptom relief, for time being, we usually use short-acting nitrate for pain relief, anginal pain relief. So this is in short, very simple guideline how we usually treat in our practical life over here. And this is lifestyle modification. I'm not going to detail. Everybody of us knows that. Then what are the pharmacological therapy in coronary syndrome? Usually 2 types. One is secondary prevention, I have already discussed, and another is anti-anginal therapy, as I already discussed. So these are the 2 types of main therapy, pharmacology therapy we use in chronic coronary syndrome. So traditional symptomatic pharmacotherapy is like this. As I told earlier, the 2 types, one is outcome prevention, lifestyle medicine, control of risk factor, and then drugs. I have already told you the aspirin, the statin, ACE inhibitor, etc. And symptomatic relief, first line and second line. So this is the generic format of treatment of chronic coronary syndrome till now. And the similar diagram has been given by the recent guidelines, European guideline 2019. Here again, we have got many steps, and there are many subgroup of patients. They have grouped the patient by standard therapy for patient with a high heart rate, patient with low heart rate, patient with LV dysfunction or heart failure, and patient with low blood pressure. And on the first step, they have got suggested various treatments. So they call it almost first line, beta blocker with CSB, etc., etc. If they not improve, they go for the second step. If they do not go, they go for the third step. And finally, if nothing is improved, they can use certain drugs. Of them are nicorandil, ranolazine, and trimetazine. So possibly this is the extension of the common traditional aspect of angina management in our day-to-day life, only in a bigger aspect. But we must remember that the strategy must be adapted to each patient characteristics and preferences and does not necessarily follow the steps indicated in the figure. We must not always follow, because in our clinical practice, from of our own experience and from the recent publications, we can change like this. But still, this is a guideline which is an extension of our older belief of first and second line of drugs. Now, this first and second line therapy in chronic coronary syndrome, is it a belief or an evidence? The beautiful paper published recently is the Anti-Anginal Drugs, Beliefs and Evidence, systemic review covering 50 years of medical treatment. So this is a great review article. And the main aspect of this article is there is no evidence to support the use of first and second line treatments for the management of angina. Rather, the medical therapy of angina should be personalized and tailored toward the individuals with an understanding of the likely pathophysiological mechanisms and comorbidities. So this is what has been changed and thought that this is not as evidence based. This is possibly the belief based, as we believe from last 50 years or so. Considering this evidence, a recent article has been published in the Nature Review Cardiology, a diamond approach to personalized treatment in angina. And the main aspect of this particular presentation is, given that all anti-anginal drugs have similar efficacy and level of evidence and no survival benefit, considering some drugs but not others to be first line is difficult. Means that all drugs possibly are the same brand, first and second line is not actually an evidence based. So patients with stable angina can have several comorbidities, and angina might result from various underlying pathology. So treatment must be personalized. A personalized approach of angina treatment has been proposed, and we call them as they consider here the patient, their comorbidities, and underlying mechanism of disease. So considering the patient characteristics, a personalized approach has been proposed, which has been called as diamond approach of angina therapy. So this is the diamond approach of personalized treatment. So particular drugs or comorbidities of drugs are preferred of specific pathogens or comorbidities. For example, if we see in here, a diabetic patient may have ranolazine, verapamil, ivabradine, trimetazine, diltiazem, or nitrates, and beta blocker. You can see over here, this is the preferred color, this is the all possible color, and this is the sometimes contraindication. So if we have a bit illustrated view in this next slide, let's example from the left hand side, a patient with a high rate, say more than 70 beats per minute. So preferred drug will be here in the green color is beta blocker or diltiazem, ivabradine, or verapamil, and this is not contraindicated here, and this drug is contraindicated. Red is contraindicated. So similarly, the patient can be classified according to their comorbidities like heart rate, like hypertension, and like microvascular angina. So this is the main aspect of diamond approach. Look here, they consider the patient's comorbidities, the patient's pathophysiology, and the patient's and a patient approach. So this is one of the diamond approach for personal treatment of angina. Next is the revascularization. With increasing effectiveness of prevention and medical therapy, as you all know, the rate of coronary revascularization has decreased and is largely confined to some subgroup of patients with unacceptable angina, severe LV systolic dysfunction, and as I told earlier, the high-risk coronary anatomy. So revascularization is indicated only for the patient who will have survival benefit from the revascularization or who have limiting symptoms despite optimum medical therapy. So these are the few indications I have taken from the books and journals, and these indications usually differ from person to person, from center to center, and from the expertise of the operator to expertise of the operator. So this may differ. This is a general indication for CABG, and this is general indications for PCI in case of patients with chronic coronary syndrome. Remember that this indication may overlap because as the cost of the experience of the operator himself. So those who are interested, they can consider, they can review this particular newer clinical trial. These are some major clinical trials for the management of stable ischemic heart disease in the past 2 decades, starting from the COURAGE trial to BARI trial, etc., to the very recent trial, ischemia trial. You can have a look of this thing, and you can have your own idea about whom to do medical therapy, whom to do revascularization when and when it is needed. Very recently, the textbook of cardiovascular medicine of the ESC has given this beautiful picture. One, they have said that the benefit of revascularization therapies beyond symptomatic improvement remains debatable. This is very debatable. And as opposed to the patient with large areas of deep myocardium and demonstrated evidence of ischemia, low-risk patients have better outcome with optimum medical therapy. If you can see here in the picture on the right-hand side, if the patient's risk is increased, you can see more will be benefited from the revascularization. If the risk is lower, there may more outcome will be better with optimum medical therapy. As a physician or a cardiologist, practicing cardiologist, it is our responsibility to classify this patient and give this patient personalized advice when and where to do revascularization. Remember, not when, where to do revascularization is very important. Now, at the end, possibly about this lecture, if we consider this, very recently, Ferrari has published a publication in 2020, the contemporary evaluation and management in a simpler format of stable ischemic heart disease or chronic coronary syndrome. If we diagnose any patient with a stable angina, so we must have started initial medical treatment. And initial medical treatment, when indicated, the first investigation they call it should be CT coronary angiography. As I told you in the earlier presentation, earlier slides, that CT angiography possibly is coming to in the forefront. CT coronary angiography should be done. So this CT coronary angiography, if there is no atherosclerosis, so only lifestyle modification, other may be enough. If there is limited non-obstructive lesion in 1 or 2 vessels, additional moderate medical therapy is enough. If there is extensive non-obstructive or obstructive lesion, more than 50% CAD, additional intensive medical therapy possibly enough. And if not, if failed, they can go for PCI CABG. And if there is left main disease, 3 vessel disease, etc., additional intensive medical therapy must be given, of course, with revascularization. So this is a very simple decision-making diagram how we can proceed with the patient with chronic stable coronary artery disease. And the last portion, maybe another 2 slides regarding the angina management with metabolic agents. So what is not that heart is an organ, moving organ, contracting organ, and very strong muscle in the body. Possibly heart is the strongest muscle of the body. And in every day, heart beats about 100,000 times, pumps about 7,000 liters of blood through the body, and needs 6 kilograms of ATP to function. That is 20 to 30 times its own weight. So remember that how the heart functions and how much energy it needs. And he gets this energy from glucose, lactate, and fatty oxidation along with oxygen. They transfer AMP to ADP plus ADP to ATP, and which gives rise to the energy to the heart. So in OP 1990 has uttered an important aspect is he said that the heart is an organ that needs energy from metabolism. A metabolic disease, ischemia or myocardial ischemia, should ideally be treated by metabolic therapy. That was proposed by OP in Lancet 1999. So now see how cardiac metabolism occurs in normal. Just simply, if you can see the diagram, most of the energy we get from glycolysis, glucose oxidation, and from the fatty oxidation. Different. So they have got some normal aspect, but these sources sometimes can be changed when there is some nutritional status changes, or there may be fasting condition. This exercise is sometimes availability of the hormones, the contribution of these three types or four types of energy development may be compromised. This is the normal we can do it. So if we can calculate the energy production, so for our simplicity, we go for only for glucose metabolism and fatty acid oxidation. So if you see for the glucose metabolism, giving lactate to pyruvate, and here glucose oxidation, more than 2 efficient pathway, this is per ATP of oxygen regard 6.4. But for fatty acid oxidation, consume more oxygen because per oxygen ATP occurs 5.6. So glucose oxidation is more cost effective than the beta oxidation, which is expensive. So this is the two pathway. They can supply oxygen. So our idea should be to give importance to the glucose oxidation and to inhibit fatty oxidation. But in certain situations, fatty oxidation takes the upper hand. For example, here, see on the right hand on the picture, in period of ischemia, sustained ischemia, fatty acid oxidation increased and glucose oxidation decreases. So that is the abnormality occur during ischemia. So our corrective term should be to decrease fatty acid oxidation and to thereby increasing glucose oxidation. Thereby, we can give the least costly ATP to the heart. So now, this optimization of energy metabolism is very important aspect to treat ischemic heart disease. In both acute and chronic ischemic heart disease, optimization of the cardiac energy metabolism can reduce cardiac injury, improve cardiac function, and improve cardiac efficiency. This can be achieved by stimulating glucose oxidation. Increasing glucose oxidation can be achieved by either directly stimulating glucose oxidation, which is not always possible, or inhibiting fatty acid oxidation. So metabolic oxidation is, there are certain drugs, for example, trimetazidine maximizes the oxygen to make more ATP available. These agents protect the heart from ischemia by increasing the glucose metabolism relative to the fatty acids, and may be used in combination therapy with hemodynamic agents like beta blocker, calcium blocker, and ACE inhibitors. So there are lots of ways to target the fatty acid oxidation, but most commonly used and therapeutically proved is trimetazidine, which actually blocks 3-keto-acyl coethylase addition enzyme, and thereby they block the fatty acid oxidation and thereby increasing the less expensive glucose metabolism. So this is how they work when they combine with beta blocker. Beta blocker actually they reduce the energy demand, and trimetazidine actually increase supply of them. So thereby, in both the way, they can improve, and trimetazidine has improved the ATP production more than 33% in cases. In clinical trial, it has been shown that the thiazide significantly increases the total work by 1.2 minutes, and trimetazidine also increases the exercise capacity within 2 weeks when they are used. I mean, a recent study with, actually not very recent, it was studied in 2008. It was a Time Bangla study where Bastral MR, that is trimetazidine, provides an anti-angina efficacy in Bangladesh, where mean weekly number of angina attacks were reduced by 71%, and nitroglycerin consumption was reduced by 72%, giving rise to this aspect of clinical use. Now, at the end, this is the last one possibly, and if we can now have a clear picture, we have got angina because of myocardial oxygen demand and increased oxygen supply imbalance. We have got calcium blocker, beta blocker, evaporative nitrates, all are medical drugs. Mostly they try to decrease myocardial oxygen demand. And actually the revascularization increases the oxygen supply. And most of the drugs, sometimes they can use to some extent increase the oxygen supply. But trimetazine MR has got a balanced format. By increasing the energy requirements, they have decreased the microbial oxygen demand in certain extent, and also increased oxygen supply because of supplying the less expensive ATP to the myocardium. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm at the end. So, what are the key messages I want to tell you? One is the chronic coronary syndrome is a chronic, complex, and dynamic syndrome. We must remember this is not at all a static syndrome or a stable syndrome. It is a multifactorial disease and requires multi-target approach. Medical therapy of chronic coronary syndrome should be tailored to participating mechanisms, comorbidities, and patient tolerabilities. That is important. Revascularization is indicated if it will improve survival or relieve symptoms refractory to important. We must say that the patient may improve survival. That is a very important aspect of asking the patient for revascularization. With increasing effectiveness of prevention and medical therapy, the rate of revascularization has decreased and is largely contained in subgroup of patients with unacceptable angina, severe LV dysfunction, or high-risk coronary anatomy. Results from the large clinical trials support medical therapy rather than revascularization as an initial management strategy for most patients with stable ischemic heart disease. Available data support revascularization only for specific patient subgroups, in contrast to prevalent practice patterns throughout the world, including Bangladesh. The last is the optimization of the anti-anginal treatment is needed in chronic coronary syndrome patients before, during, and even after revascularization. Metabolic agents are potentially effective new anti-anginal option with a mechanism of action complementary to the traditional anti-anginal drugs like beta blockers, calcium blockers, etc. Given its efficacy, lack of contraindication, and tolerability, trimetazidine can be chosen for patients with chronic coronary syndrome. Recent guidelines given is two-way indications. With this, ladies and gentlemen, and Mr. Chairman, thank you all. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you, sir, for your brilliant and informative presentation on chronic coronary syndrome. We are very much adapted with the name of acute coronary syndrome, but chronic coronary syndrome is new to many of us. So now the session is open for discussion. We will take some questions. This is the question and answer session. If you have any question, you can ask, or you can drop your question in chat box so we can discuss. So we don't have any question in the chat box yet. So I will request Professor. No, it's all right, sir. Sorry. Perfect. Perfect, sir. Now I request Professor M.A. Bashar, sir, who is one of our panelists today, to give his opinion about today's topic.
Assalamu alaikum. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Respected chairperson, my teacher, Professor Shirajul Haq sir, and the brilliant speaker, eminent cardiologist of the country, Professor Nazrul Islam. He talked very nicely, elaborately regarding the chronic coronary syndrome, and we got a lot of informations out of his deliberation. Many thanks to him taking troubles to prepare all these things. And naturally, now the management of chronic coronary syndrome, it is well defined and very precisely mentioned, and we can go for the management of these cases in a very rational way. And because if you follow the guideline and if we exercise our individual knowledge and clinical practice, the treatment is always for all patients. We have to treat the patient as a whole, not the single entity. So naturally, we have to evaluate the clinical features and investigation, and treatment will vary from individual to individual. And guidelines will not solve everything. Our practical experience will solve the problem actually. And he clearly mentioned that the need of the revascularization has reduced because of if we go for the rational approach to the patient, if we think that when we are treating myself, what is the best offer, best treatment, then naturally we can give the best treatment to our patients. So this is the main thing what I feel. And if we go rationally, and then rational treatment and very effective treatment and very good treatment we can offer to our patients. So this is very important. And as it is a multifactorial disease, so our approach will be to touch every corner of the background etiology, and we should go for that approach. And definitely trimetazidine, and then the ranolazine, and the nicorandil, all this combination along with the beta blockers and the calcium channel blockers and antiplatelet drugs, we can go for the best treatment along with the lifestyle modification, which we forget many times. So thanks to the surveyor and thanks to the learned participants for participating in this scientific seminar, and the panel experts and the moderator, and finally the surveyor who organized this scientific seminar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for your comment. Professor Dr. Mohammad Abu Bakr, who has given a comment to Professor Nazrul Islam, sir. Thanks to Professor Nazrul Islam, sir, for nice and elaborate presentation. Regards, Professor Mohammad Abu Bakr. We don't have any question yet, so I have a question to sir. Sir, is a subset of patients who have typical coronary artery coronary symptoms like anginal pain, but they go for ETT, it is positive, and then we go send them for angiogram, and it is negative. So we call them cardiac syndrome X. So sometimes the interventionist, he or she said that you don't have any coronary artery disease, so you don't need any aspirin, nothing. So what is your recommendation? As we know that many of the patients have microvascular disease. So do you think we should comment like this, that you don't need any aspirin or something like that? Sir, unmute yourself. We cannot hear you.
This type of risk is very common, and we cannot say that this does not have any ischemia. Possibly, if the characteristic of the pain is ischemic, exercise stress is positive, meaning indicating some sort of ischemia. So we must try to think that this patient may have ischemic heart disease without significant coronary artery stenosis. So they may have either at the microvascular level or vasospasmic level, or maybe some of the metabolic level. So basic idea is he has got ischemic pain. Ischemic pain is assessed by AST changes, and in those cases, if the symptom is not typical, then we may have gone for angiography. So one angiography is normal, then possibly it is negatively. Though it is negative, it proves that these patients have ischemia, not for coronary disease. But next point is the likelihood and the comorbidities we must gather out of it. If you find some comorbidity, you must treat it. But in all practical means, these patients should be treated as to a prevention of the next acute coronary syndrome-like things, or improving the angina. So this type of patient, you have to assess whether this is a spasmic pain, or there may be some microvascular pain. In that cases, two aspects is very important. One aspect is the antiplatelet. Antiplatelet should be common, and another is the statin. And another aspect is, if you think that the patient may have some sort of a spasmic component, then you go for diltiazem. So definitely, as you told, that these patients should be labeled as ischemia, maybe not as non-ischemic pain, but not typical angina, but he has got some sort of atypical angina. And pathophysiologically, the patient should be treated as ischemic heart disease with this particular drugs. And of course, the management of his comorbidities and risk factors.
Can I ask a question, Dr. Niloufar?
Yes.
Dr. Niloufar, can I ask a question?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You go on.
Firstly, I'd like to thank Professor Nazrul sir for his excellent presentation. So I have a question that is related to use of antiplatelet. So what is the exact rule of using antiplatelet? Sometimes many of our patients we see in chronic cases, they do get dual antiplatelet for years together. And what is the exact indication of using antiplatelet drug, dual antiplatelet drug, or triple antiplatelet drug, or single antiplatelet drug, in which situation and at what stage of coronary artery disease or ischemic heart disease? Thank you, sir.
Yeah, your question is comprehensive. A lot of, actually, the guideline, there is a separate guideline for antiplatelets. For the use, I will just answer only those part of the use of antiplatelet in case of stable ischemic heart disease or chronic coronary syndrome. In chronic coronary syndrome, actually, if there is no acute coronary syndrome, right, or if the patient has passed 1 year after acute coronary syndrome, possibly single antiplatelet is enough for continuing it, unless it is destabilized or something as ACS has offered. So there are certain strong indications given by the guidelines when you have to use dual antiplatelet, where you use triple antiplatelet, where you with antiplatelet with anticoagulants. That is a separate issue. But for chronic stable angina, because today's presentation is only for chronic stable angina or chronic coronary syndrome, in these cases, if the patient comes from the ACS group after 1 year, possibly we're giving only one antiplatelet drug. It doesn't require it. If there is no other indications for dual antiplatelet agents, for example, if I've got some other disease, aggressive peripheral arterial disease, other things. So only for chronic coronary artery, you use only single antiplatelet drug. Either you will go for aspirin or go for clopidogrel. Possibly that is suffice to know that. And the newer antiplatelet drug, there are a lot of indications, new indications given by the promoter, and possibly sometimes overused by the interventional cardiologist. So I don't think in chronic stable angina or chronic coronary syndrome, more than single antiplatelet drug should be used local time. And for dual, there are some indications, some dual antiplatelet for 9 months, some 12 months, there are certain indications. So I'll refer you to find some of the guidelines for the antiplatelet anticoagulants agents used in coronary artery disease as a whole. And most of the differences, most of the elaboration, deliberations are mostly, as Niloufar was telling, is for acute coronary syndrome. Starting discussing acute coronary, starting and discussing and using acute coronary syndrome is financially and debatably very important nowadays. Thank you.
Sir, can I ask a supplementary question? Whenever you are planning to use clopidogrel, is it necessary to do the resistance testing before giving that? Because somebody says that there are certain percentage of population from this part of the world who are resistant to clopidogrel.
In this case, I use usually two types. You choose in which context you are using it. If you see in our context, the resistance is pretty common. It's better to have, if the patient can afford, you can go for resistance test. But I most likely, of the time try to convince my patient is aspirin is superior to clopidogrel, not in a scientific way, but that is superior, and that does not require any resistance test. So in 90%, more than 90% patient, I usually give aspirin and try to convince them to use aspirin. But there are funny patients. Sir, only 8 আনা দামের ওষুধ, এটা কেমন হবে? আমি তো ওইটা খাইতাম 8 টাকা দাম। So that is a separate issue. But I think aspirin should be the primary antiplatelet drug for a chronic stable angina, especially in our financial situation and community situation.
Thank you.
Can I make a question or comment, sir? Dr. Govinda from Mymensingh.
Yes.
Dr. Govinda from Mymensingh.
Govinda, yes, go on. You may.
চেহারা দেখা যাচ্ছে শুধু গ্রিন জি দেখা যাচ্ছে।
Thank you, sir, for your nice, important talk about the chronic coronary syndrome from its basic pathophysiology and molecular level, and also management strategy in your term chronic coronary syndrome. Thank you, our chairman sir, and all the moderators, and ultimately all the viewers, respected viewers. I have a question, sir. You mentioned in your talk all ischemic heart disease, not coronary artery disease. Have any further comments or explanation regarding this? Please, sir.
The last example, Nilufar was giving, that the patient have typical angina, coronary angiography does show totally normal coronary artery disease. So this is one of the example of ischemic heart disease without any coronary artery disease. Remember, coronary artery disease, the term coronary artery disease signifies the pathology of the disease. Ischemic heart disease defines the pathophysiology of the heart disease. Angina is the symptom of the pathophysiology, not the pathology only. So if the patient has got coronary stenosis, has angina, so this can be equated. This is obstructive coronary disease with an angina. If a patient has the typical angina with epicardial artery normal, he is ischemic, he is angina, but in our usual term, he does not have coronary artery disease. He may have microvascular disease. He may have disease in the mitochondrial level. As I have told you, that coronary artery ischemia is the disease of the metabolism. So there may be different aspects varying. So that is the whole explanation for your term. So all coronary artery disease are not ischemic heart disease, and all ischemic heart disease are not coronary artery. This is not my pronunciation. This has been pronounced in 2012 by Professor Marzilli in the ESC meeting.
Dr. Nilufar, Dr. Nilufar, আমি কিছু বলতে পারি একটু? I can ask a question, sir?
রওশন না বললে কেমন
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Sir,
Your panelist.
sir, I have an engagement at 9 p.m., so I have to go leave earlier. So a simple question. The CAG is negative, but ETT is positive, patient having definitely angina. How will you separate from the spastic from the microvascular angina? Another question, is there any role of trimetazine in vasospastic angina?
The two questions. The first question, let me answer, because the vasospastic angina and the microvascular angina is there. I will omit it. So there may be certain tests, maybe my metabolic tests and other tests, we can separate it to some extent. But for clinician like we people doing it almost like practicing as GP, we actually think by negatively or by diagnosis of rule out. When we do not find any patient with significant coronary stenosis, patient typical angina, has got diabetes, and we think that this is microvascular disease. This is the very clinician aspect of it. But scientific aspect, like many of the teachers in the university, they go for further. They go for various type of tests, the perfusion test, the imaging test, and then CT, MRI, and MRI, gadolinium test. There are a lot of tests. You can at least for 90% cases you can separate it out. And angina with normal coronary artery disease itself is a subject, so that can be done. The second question about trimetazidine. Remember, trimetazidine and other metabolic drugs, they act at the mitochondrial level. The many drugs, traditional drugs like beta blocker, calcium blocker, and revascularization, they act mostly on the epicardial level. So, if we do not have any epicardial disease, we cannot prove definitely this is a vasospastic disease. Possibly the trimetazidine theoretically and scientifically should improve the energy production and thereby energy input. So in summary, the patient who do not have epicardial disease and we cannot prove it is a vasospastic disease, then trimetazidine should be to some extent effective. Not only effective, in fact, we do not have any other drug except trimetazidine or ranolazine to target this type of thing.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
Thank you,
sir.
sir. নীলুফার, আমি একটু আর্লি দেবো, একটু বলে চলে যাবো। থ্যাংক ইউ
Yes,
স্যার
sir,
ফর
বলেন।
ইউর বিউটিফুল অ্যান্ড এলাবোরেট ডিসকাশন অ্যান্ড এক্সিলেন্ট। স্যার ইজ অলওয়েজ অ্যান এক্সিলেন্ট lecturer. So sir left nothing to comment regarding chronic coronary syndrome. So sir, thank you again. Thank you panelists, Dr. Nilufar and our chairman sir. I cannot see at this moment. Thank you, Professor Athar, and all the viewer. Thank you very much.
Roshan, thank you. Safe second.
ठीक है सर, जी सर, दुआ करें सर, जी दुआ करें।
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for your nice comment. Sir, we have a question.
Thank you very much. Thank you, जी, thank you.
We have an in chat box, sir. So it's from Dr. Kamal Pasha. Thank you so much, sir, for your elaborate and informative presentation. I have a small query. Does adding ranolazine to trimetazidine provide any added benefit? The patient with chronic coronary syndrome patient should receive trimetazidine, or who will receive ranolazine?
This reminds me the nephrologist practice, because all the nephrologists get patient of renal disease, almost end-stage renal disease, and has got uncontrolled hypertension. They do not have, and most of the drugs have been used either by the internist or by the cardiologist, already have done it. So they have nothing to do, nothing to add actually. So they add whatever they find, they add it. So adding ranolazine with other hemodynamic drug and trimetazidine is the practice like those, that if you do not have anything and still the patient is having a symptom and does not want to undergo CABG, you can add it. But that is not a scientifically proven disease. Either you use ranolazine or you use metazidine. Please remember that metazidine is not yet, I do not know, Andalip may say it, not yet been approved by the FDA. So in many patients I prescribe, they are living in US, they are using trimetazidine bought from here, but they cannot prescribe it, they cannot do it, say it there. So trimetazidine and ranolazine has got another electrophysiological action. So in that case, if the patient has got certain antiarrhythmic probabilities, then it is better to use ranolazine than trimetazidine. Adding trimetazidine, ranolazine, and sometimes necorandil, I do not know, many patients are possibly are those practice where nothing can be done, adding something may give some relief to them. So this is not scientifically I found anywhere, and none of the guidelines till now has proposed the combination of metadizidine and ranolazine. Thank you.
One thing, if there is refractory angina not responding to beta blocker, calcium channel blocker, or trimetazidine, in that case, I think because the ranolazine has got different mode of action, it prevents the slow sodium influx and reduce the wall tension along with the calcium. So in that case, we can consider.
Yes.
Sir, I have another question. So one group of patient, a female patient who have SCAD patient, that spontaneous coronary artery dissection patient, can we detect them with any modality of any of the investigations particularly, or just by coronary angiogram?
Actually, there is a high sensitivity and high resolution CT angio can detect to some extent, and of course this a final diagnosis must be done by CAG, coronary angiography, this thing, and this is not in the purview of chronic study. But in most of the cases, they are in the purview of acute coronary syndrome.
Okay.
There is one question. Question is, finally, the algorithm shown that patient coming with angina pectoris, we should go for the CT angiogram. Do you think in our country context, it will be the feasible approach for treating our patient groups?
Basically, in the 2019 guidelines, they have mentioned mostly they have mentioned that the term like this by saying was like almost like this, may not be exact what I am telling you, that CT angiography possibly in future replace exercise tolerance test. So they have taken CT angiography in such a station. They have done it in their situations, European situation. Maybe not be possible for our country, because you see, exercise test can be done maybe 2,000, 3,000 taka, but the CT angiography done maybe 15,000 taka. So that is why I was telling that our decision, our suggestion, our guideline should be context based. So that is why they have given it. The article I have mentioned, and from where I have taken the algorithm of CT angiography is published in 2020, and the guidelines was published in 2019. And that particular review paper reviewed almost all evidences, and they have proposed that sort of algorithm where they have asked for the CT angiography without doing anything. Before that, we have to do some basic tests, some non-invasive tests, and for final decision making, they have taken angiography, CT angiography, because their CT angiography was almost equal to echocardiography examination. Echocardiography charge is pretty high in Europe, pretty high. So that is why. But that particular algorithm may be possible for the patients, rich patient like Professor Bashar. Hope he doesn't need it. But for general population, we can follow our old thing.
But this algorithm is extremely nice.
Yes. More simplified and easy to understand and easy to implement also.
Yes.
At the expense of the
financial constraint, we cannot do.
Yes. Only the financial constraint of the patient.
Sir, we are sorry that we cannot hear from Professor Attar Ali sir. He's in Nator, so he has some network problem. So he will not say anything about this today's topic. So if anyone have any questions anymore. If we have no questions, then we can go to our chairperson of the session, Now I request our chairperson of the session, Professor K. H.S. Shirajul Haq sir, for concluding remarks.
I must congratulate our speaker, Professor Nazrul Islam, very much elaborately has discussed. কোনো জায়গায় বাদ নেই সোজা কথা তারপরেও আমরা মনে হয় যে some questions did arise as for example non-atherosclerotic chest pain. So I can add something, say severe anemia, myocardial breeze. So there are dot. So these are very quick question, quiz. They are quiz type of question we practice in our early days. What are the non-atherosclerotic coronary artery disease? So this is very clear. And to me also, I find that trimetazine has been added in Europe and this pre-Atlantic. Post-Atlantic people are using your phenolazine. And sometimes patients come to me, what to give, I don't know, because angina pectoris, especially coronary angina pectoris, is number of the patient is very much big in our clinical practice. And we must be very careful in putting any terms. As for example, recently, a very renowned doctor had told after first angioplasty of Saurav Ganguly that you can play cricket. He can play cricket. But after a few weeks, he developed again T2 of the angioplasty. So this coronary artery disease is very treacherous. You cannot comment in this way because multifactorial is coronary artery pathology, severe anemia, and all everything involved, platelet. So we must be very careful in managing all this chronic coronary disease. And I think Professor Nazrul has explained nicely, and that will stimulate us to read more and more. And that is a good sign. Sometimes I must congratulate also Surveyor for arranging this type of seminar. That also helps us to read more and more. At least go through books, go learning through the slides. It is very much beneficial. And also I'm happy that all the many learned specialist cardiologists and physicians took part in this seminar. So everybody is also not only hungry physically, they're hungry also of knowledge. I appreciate that. They are also hungry of knowledge, and we have Surveyor has arranged everything for this satisfaction of this knowledge, the field of the knowledge. So I must congratulate everybody. I should not take time. I am personally very much benefited by Professor Nazrul's lecture because every time I am eager to listen to him because he covered comprehensive lecture, and this is my beneficial for me. At least if I read books, at least 1 month will be required for all these books to read, literatures to read. So I must congratulate Professor Nazrul, and he could elaborate for us. আমি বলি সাগর শেষে মুক্তা আনলো আমাদের জন্য. So thank you very much, Professor Nazrul. Also Nilufar very nicely guided us for this conference, and Professor Bashar, Professor Roshan, and also our physician from Uttara. They are very much eager to learn and also teach us, because every question, I remember one of the Professor Nur Islam's speech, students are source of inspiration. Now we are also students, so our learned students also our inspiration. We can learn more and more. So thank you very much. আমি আর বেশি সময় নিতে চাই না, আমি আর কিছু বলতে চাই নাকি? নিশ্চয়ই বলবেন।
জি স্যার বলবেন।
Thank you, বলেন।
Thank you sir for your precious time. Thank you audience for your participation and patience hearing. Now the vote of thanks will be given by Dr. Tofajjal Hossain Bhuiya, Head of Operations and Surveyor Bangladesh Operations. So here I say goodbye to you all and have a good night's sleep and dream. Thank you.
Thank you, Yes, assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Dr. Niloufar Fatima. In fact, I'm not a doctor, but probably I really, it is really my pleasure to work with all these doctors. And it is one of the, in fact, reason I always feel proud to work with this company and as well as this community. So as you all know, in fact, Servier, about Servier, that the French innovative company, pharmaceutical company, and we always actually work for the patient, for the benefit of the patient. And you know, probably you know that it's a foundation. It's a foundation, and that means all the profit of this company goes to research, further research. And we have actually the program of what we had today, that this Vastrellamar or trimetazidine, it is also one of our research molecule. And when I'm talking about actually research molecule, you sir all know that you are having less and less actually access to research molecule in Bangladesh. And you know, recent time, all the leaving the multinationals actually have been giving less opportunity to the access of research molecule for you and for your patients. And when actually there are less and less research molecule, in fact, that means in fact ultimately the sufferings of have you know, the patients, and also the limitations are having the good medication. When I am actually talking about that the right or good medication, that you know that we tell that this suppose Bastrilamar, it is actually impossible to copy, because it is our research molecule, and we tell that our technical people always tell that, our researchers tell that this is a modified release, and we never actually disclosed our patent. We never disclosed the you know, structure of the this molecule. And whatever the so-called copy or biosimilar products you can get in the market in the name of copy drug of trimetazidine, is not actually a trimetazidine exactly. The you know, it cannot give exactly same benefit. So all the studies, all the, in fact, the evidences, it is in favor. That means it is actually done with trimetazidine, and it cannot be get with a copy, so-called copy trimetazidine. So it is actually same for other drugs as well. Like we have other products in cardiovascular diabetes field. So I would like to actually thanks to Professor Nuzul Islam for his this nice presentation, and also you know, supporting the ischemic heart disease patient, cardiovascular patients of Bangladesh. And big thanks to Professor K.M.H. Shirazul Haq sir for giving his time. Sir, thank you very much for coming here and also supporting Serbi. In fact, we are all having a same cause to help the patient of Bangladesh. And I believe that this is something we are actually continuing together in coming days as well. Professor Dr. M.A. Bashar, sir, thank you very much for also your participation and your support as always we are having. And I would like to also thank Professor Mohammad Roshan Ali, who left already for his another appointment, and also Professor Dr. Mohammad Atar Ali, who actually could not finally stay in the program due to the poor connection. So altogether, I believe that we can work together because we are having same cause or same purpose, which is actually helping the patient of Bangladesh. And we all know that, sir, these millions of patients in Bangladesh, they need our help, our support. And I, with my team, all are working, in fact, to help. Our main cause, our reason is actually, the purpose is actually to help the patient of Bangladesh. And Serbia, with lot of struggle, when all the multinationals are leaving the country, we Serbia actually staying in this country to help these millions of patients with really a strong purpose and a strong cause. That's why actually Dr. Servier established this company just 60 years back. and we are continuing this journey with my colleagues, all colleagues here in Bangladesh. And thank you very much for supporting us. And we actually always believe that, and it is in fact our biggest strength, that you, the senior doctors or senior clinicians who are supporting us, your support in fact giving us the real hope for helping the patients of Bangladesh. Thank you all. Thank you all.
Assalamu alaikum.
জি
তোমাকে ধন্যবাদ শ্রেয়া ভাই। আসসালামু আলাইকুম। ভালো থাকেন সবাই জন্য ধন্যবাদ।
জি স্যার, আসসালামু আলাইকুম স্যার।
নীলুফার ভালো থাকো।
জি স্যার, আসসালামু আলাইকুম স্যার। থ্যাংক ইউ স্যার।
জি স্যার, থ্যাংক ইউ স্যার। ডক্টর নীলুফার, আপনাকে ধন্যবাদ।
আচ্ছা, ওকে, থ্যাংক ইউ। আমি অনেক কিছু শিখলাম। স্যারের লেকচার সবসময় ভালো লাগে, অনেক কিছু শেখার আছে। থ্যাংক ইউ স্যার, এত সুন্দর প্রেজেন্টেশন, ওয়ার্ল্ড ক্লাস প্রেজেন্টেশন। থ্যাংক ইউ স্যার।
থ্যাংক ইউ।
থ্যাংক ইউ।
আচ্ছা, পুরো প্রোগ্রামটা ভিডিও করা আছে আর কি, রেকর্ড করেছি আমি। সো যদি কেউ চায়, কোনো ডক্টর যদি চায়, সেক্ষেত্রে আমরা রেকর্ডিংটা প্রোভাইড করতে পারবো, স্যারের স্পিচ সহ। সো আমরা শেষ, আমি মিটিংটা এন্ড করে দিলাম, কেমন?
সাদি ভাই,
নারায়ণ দা, কি অবস্থা, কেমন আছেন?
ওকে, লিভ করলাম। হ্যাঁ,
ওকে, ঠিক আছে।
থ্যাংক ইউ।
থ্যাংক ইউ অল। আসসালামু আলাইকুম।
ওয়ালাইকুম আসসালাম।